where are you right now?
I am at the studio that I'm working at in Portland.
Lovely. Which
Um,
is what? Is
it's called Red Rockets Glare
ooh.
or Rockets Red Glare. I should really probably check that. I'm just gonna hold the phone. How about
Yeah.
that? Yeah, it's the owner is Raymond Richards, who has worked on a ton of really great records over the years, and he took this studio over in January, probably.
Okay. Nice.
And we met right when I moved up to Portland. And when he took over the studio, he was like, "Hey, do you want to help me run the studio?" And I was like, "Yeah, I do." So I've been working here for the last 8 months.
I love it. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Um, Hi everybody who's joining. I'm really happy to see all of you here. I see some people I know, some people I don't know, and that's all great. We're here talking about record making with Dom Armstrong. My name is Greg Lloyd. I'm a mastering engineer. Uh, Dominic Armstrong is a fantastic producer and recording engineer, and so we're kind of going back and forth and talking DIY for a little bit. So Dom, tell me a little bit about like the most recent project that you finished.
Oh man, I just wrapped up an EP with a lovely artist named Katie May. She's
Ooh,
sort of like a country Americana, sort of like outlaw country kind of stuff. We just sent that off. I think we got it back from mastering, like I don't know, maybe a week or so ago.
cool.
Um, and yeah, it's just been like a steady stream. A lot of singles of mixing that I've been doing lately. People have recorded at home, um, and then sending it to me. Um, yeah.
That's great. So like with like when you're getting stuff from people that are recording themselves, I want to kind of get into like DIY and professional kind of hybrid processes. So
Hmm.
like what do you tend to notice as being like red flags or good things or like how if any of the DIY people that are watching now, like how do they
Sure.
optimize
Yeah.
doing it
I mean,
themselves?
yeah, I think probably the thing that I notice more than anything else, especially when things are coming in for me to mix, are a lot of choices left unmade by the artist. Usually there's like a couple too many microphones on the drums, that like, I don't know, maybe it was an experiment or maybe it was like, I don't know, I've seen this on a video somewhere, so I'm just going to do it too. Um, that, and then, multiple microphones on guitars that aren't summed together or whatever.
So there's like too
And
much complication.
too much complication. I just feel like there's a lot of bad advice out there for people who are like learning how to record
Totally.
or
Absolutely.
recording themselves. Like, how do I get a really good guitar tone? Um, and I am a huge advocate of like less is more. So if you can, the way you get a good guitar tone is like write a cool part and like make sure your guitar and your amp sound good.
Yeah.
And then you can pretty much throw like whatever microphone on in front of your amp, and it'll probably sound pretty nice to work with.
And we can get a little technical here. Is it like phase issues with multiple mics that are causing these issues? Like, what is it?
It, yeah, it certainly can be. That's a huge problem. For those watching at home, anytime you're using more than one microphone on a source, check the phase relationship. Like just check with the polarity button, and one way will sound better than the other way. That's a good place to start. But you can always something that I do often if I'm using two mics on the same source is I'll record into my DAW for a second, and then literally just go look at the waveform. And if they're not fully out of phase, but maybe 90 degrees or less, just go move the microphone. Moving the
Yeah.
microphone is the best way to get things in phase.
Simple. Yeah.
Then yeah, then like it's better than nudging stuff around later and dealing with delay and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, mostly I think though when I get particularly on electric guitars, if I get more than one microphone on an electric guitar, because every microphone sounds a little bit different, when you're recording. I'll just find the one that I think sounds the best, and I will mute the rest of the microphones.
So you end up like throwing out a lot of the unnecessary stuff on these DIY based projects. And do you like tell the
Yeah.
artist you're doing that? Is it like a transparent thing, or you just like, this is what I do to make it sound good? Like,
I mean, if people ask me what I'm doing, I'm more than happy to share. Usually, when I send stuff back to people, they just give me their revisions, like what they like and what they don't like. And if they say, "Hey, I want more top end out of a guitar," maybe I chose the wrong microphone, so I'll just switch which microphone I'm using and try to keep it, just try to keep it simple. Because like the main thing is like when I am not there recording something, I don't know what the intention is for all of the different microphones. I don't know why certain things were being recorded. So when I get it and it's a completely blank slate for me mentally, I'm just going to go with like what's going to make my life easiest and what I think is going to make the best like result, and trying to like find the middle way between an SM57 and a condenser on a guitar cabinet. I'm probably just going to choose the 57 because it's already doing some EQing for me and has a nice mid range.
so it's
and like,
okay to just keep it simple, like keep it as
yeah,
simple as possible. Yeah.
yeah. I think that's my advice for every human being
Yeah.
on all matters
Yeah.
about life, recording, and anything else.
So there's like a lot of I don't like, so I'm a mastering guy, so like I usually get it at like the end of the process, and particularly because I work with a lot of DIY people that maybe don't have the budget to hire like multiple engineers. A lot of times I'll get stuff that people will have either mix themselves, and I definitely notice patterns in what happens there, and a lot of it's related to like monitoring and like letting just bass stuff through that shouldn't be let through, etc.
Sure.
But like what do you notice when it comes to the question I'm trying to get at is like, how can DIY people that are wanting to record themselves get to an effective end result? Do you have to hire a mixer every time? Like, do you have to know how to mix in a certain way? Like, what advice would you give in that context?
Yeah, I mean, there's the old saying, right, that if it sounds good, it is good, right?
Yeah.
Which I think is like a really good way of holding on to things. But the problem with that is like, how do you know what sounds good?
Yeah.
There's like just getting your baseline understanding. So
Well, and what sounds good in a production context versus a musical context, right? Like those are
right.
different.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think like the main thing for people who are recording or mixing or mastering at home is listen to stuff if you want to share a playlist, right, with Tame Impala and Radiohead. I don't know, I'm just pulling names out of a hat. Make a playlist on Spotify that you want this song to be on, and listen to that through your monitoring, whatever that is. I don't care if it's your Apple earbuds or $10,000 speakers. Just get familiar with how that sounds to you in the space that you're working. And you're not trying to make a carbon copy, but you want to be in the same neighborhood, be in the same cul-de-sac as like where all the rest of that stuff is. And that can inform every decision that you make going down the line, right? So the drums on a Tame Impala record are like really squishy and sort of washy.
Yeah.
You can start thinking, even if you have zero technical know-how, you can start thinking of like, how am I gonna get my drums to sound somewhere in that ballpark? And then hopefully, you are sending it to a mastering engineer later on down the line, and you can share where your thought process was in the writing and the recording and the mixing of the song. And the mastering engineer will probably pick up on what you were doing. And in my most ideal world, there's a dialogue happening between the multiple people in the different parts of the stream.
Oh yeah.
So this has
How
happened to me multiple times where a mastering engineer has come back to me and been like, hey, like I'm noticing that there's stuff happening in the sub octave, like under 40 hertz. Is that supposed to be there or not? And I'll be like, oh, that is definitely not supposed to be there. Thank you for letting me know. And I'll go back and I'll just throw, and I can't always hear that on depending on where I'm mixing. So I'm just going to trust them. And they said it was 40 hertz. So I'm going to put a high pass filter at 40 hertz and call it a day and send it off to the mastering engineer. And they'll be like, oh, I have so much more headroom to work with. Totally. And I can make the low end like punchier and whatever, I can make it more appropriate for what you're going for.
Yeah, I mean, and that gets into my big thing is always in acoustics, right? Because even like it's something everybody can afford to do, but a lot of people don't think to do it or they do the wrong thing. Everybody can afford to build their own bass traps. Everybody can afford to buy master handbook of acoustics and read it cover to cover. Right. And everybody can afford to build their own panels, and people just don't do it because they don't see the value in it. But it's the single biggest thing you can do. I do some acoustics design and stuff as well. And every time I set bass traps up in a studio, immediately the mixes go from here to here. And right. It's not because the person doesn't know how to mix. It's because they're not hearing things correctly. If you're not mixing in an acoustically controlled room, it's like wearing dark sunglasses and trying to paint. You're not right. gonna be getting really the right feedback, and that's kind of where I'm at. And I don't know if it's I don't know if you feel this way, but whenever I go into a studio and I see the Auralex foam, the black stuff, I get really scared and I get a little sketched out.
Yeah.
That stuff, it just, for anybody listening, the Auralex, thin foam, the thinner the panel, the higher the frequency it affects. So if you're using very thin foam, it's going to do nothing to the middle or the low frequencies, which are 98% of the problems in any space. You might as well just save the money and throw a rug up on the wall or something.
Right. Absolutely.
And yeah. So thick panels, thick panels.
Yes.
Gonna make them
Yeah.
Okay.
Thick panels and spacing between the panel and the wall is a huge thing that I don't think enough people know about that. And I'm certainly no acoustic. I'm not a genius about acoustics, but I know I've been around enough to see what works and what doesn't. And so you can get away with a 2 to 4 inch panel, but adding 2 to 4 inches behind that panel on the wall is adding at least a third more efficiency to every panel that's up. And that just has to do with just creating a little extra space. So you're essentially doubling the use of that panel for everything that hits it.
And they've done studies on this. It's more effective to do, if you build a 4-inch panel and have a 2-inch air gap behind the 4 inches, it's more effective than using 6 inches of foam. Right. Because it has to do with how the foam and the air interacts together, and it makes it more efficient. But again, you have to know the questions to ask, and you have to get the right information from the right place.
And we've talked about this privately before, and I think did something on the Instagram live or the Instagram stories about monitoring and a lot of that has to go, monitoring is more than your speakers or your headphones. Monitoring is everything that happens to you while you're listening to music. So, or listening to whatever audio it is. So that's your room, it's your ears, it's the hour and state of digestion you're in. All of these different things go into how you're hearing something, and the more accurately you can hear something, or at the very least the more familiar you are with hearing things in your monitoring environment, the more effective that you're going to be able to be. And I should say, when you're familiar, being familiar isn't just oh, I've sat in this room for 100 hours, I know how it sounds. It's knowing what those deficiencies are. And so that would be a perfect time to reach out to someone like you or anyone who has, a relatively inexpensive, what are they called? One of those little microphones.
Oh, like a reference microphone.
A reference microphone. Yeah. And just, it doesn't even need to be, you can do this for free, right? More or less. You could borrow a microphone, free or cheap. And once you know those deficiencies, right? So if you have a huge dip in your room at 100 hertz, that is going to be an issue for you. Every time you pick up an electric guitar, an acoustic guitar, or a bass guitar, or actually most everything hits 100 hertz unless you're doing a piccolo flute. You're going to hit 100 hertz. And if you have a huge dip in your room, which is actually pretty common,
Totally, 100%. Yeah.
Like you're gonna boost areas in your EQ. You're gonna play certain things louder than need to be. You're gonna mix things louder than they need to be, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you get it out to your car, you put it on your headphones or whatever it is, you'll be like, what is happening to my sound? You know, like why does this sound so different? When you know that something is incorrect in your room, you can take acoustic choices or take acoustic action to help correct some of that. Or you can just mentally check yourself and stylistically check yourself that, like, I'm going to need to get used to hearing my bass guitar differently through the speakers than it will in my headphones. And
Yeah,
knowing what that discrepancy is will benefit you far more than not knowing what that
because
discrepancy
no
is.
room is perfect anyway, and like nobody,
Right.
even if you could get a perfect room, nobody has like $7 million to build from
Right.
scratch. So like,
Right.
so like it's really the knowledge is what allows you to extend stuff, but you have to have
Mm-hmm.
the right knowledge. Like for me, I do mastering, and I don't have a big fancy studio, but I
Right.
know exactly what my room is like, and I know exactly what it sounds like at the mix position. And actually, like in my situation, like I'm actually sitting in the middle of like a big null in like a really crappy area. It's like an 80 hertz null. It sucks.
Great.
But like, yeah, it sucks. But like I compensate for it because I'm used to it. I know other
Mm,
places in the room that don't have that same spot that I've like marked on the floor, and I have other pieces of monitoring that I use to fill in those gaps.
sure.
But the knowledge is what allows you to do that. And it does have to be like scientific knowledge. I get a lot of people that try and tune it only by ear, and I don't think either one of those approaches is good. Like you don't want to only go off the data, but you don't want to only go off your ears.
Right.
You got to combine those two
Yeah, you
things.
got to find a little bit of beauty. And, I was thinking about this talk earlier, and there's, when we're working with music or working with audio, there's a Venn diagram of art and there's a Venn diagram of craft,
Mm-hmm.
and like it's the intersection of those two circles where we like need to like make our best decisions at, or where
Mm-hmm.
our most useful places. And so when it comes to like treating your room or treating your monitoring or writing a song or whatever it is, like you can't go off of, this is why like the Chainsmokers are a terrible band. No offense to anybody who likes Chainsmokers, but like they've
Nice.
literally said on paper that they just copy all of whatever's on the top 40, and what that results in is like complete garbage. It's a
Yeah.
collage of that. It sounds to me the way a serial killer's note reads when it's all cut up from magazine clippings. um,
It's like you're making a trash collage.
yeah, exactly. And like, whatever, they're successful, so good for them. But and so that's going straight off of data. And then we also know, if you just go the Brian Eno approach, which is, amazing. I don't want to listen to Brian Eno when I'm working out in the morning, because
No.
like I need to get excited, and I need like a little bit of like four on the floor, tried and true goodness to get excited. And it's the same philosophy when it comes to making your room sound good, making your monitoring sound good, choosing a compressor, blah, 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 blah. It all goes down the line. It's like you have to find the place between what is objectively true and what is subjectively true.
Yeah.
And neither one of those polarities is perfect on its own.
I love it. Let's shift gears a little bit. So I want to talk about like how to know when and how to work with other people as a DIY person. Like I know
Mm,
a lot of DIY people that have a lot of trouble understanding like when they should hire somebody, if they should hire somebody. There's a lot of people that have had like some really bad experiences like
sure.
early on in their career
Right, right.
with like your buddy with like a laptop who like kind of
Yeah.
doesn't know what he's doing. And and that kind of sours them on hiring professionals through like the rest of their career, which can be kind of detrimental because it's nice sometimes to hire people, but like how do you know where to draw that line? Like how do you know when it's time to hire somebody, who you should hire? Like what
Yeah,
do you
yeah,
do?
yeah, yeah. I mean, and not only just the bad experiences with a dude in a laptop, but like I know people who have spent like thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars on records and had a horrible experience and an outcome that they don't like. Like that is the worst possible outcome
And this
for
is like in a
anybody.
professional studio.
Is in a
Yeah.
professional, like high budget producer,
Yeah.
top name producer, blah blah blah. I
So then
think like
what's that red flag? Yeah. Like
yeah,
what's a common thread?
I think in wherever you are in the spectrum, if what's coming out of the speakers is not what you have doesn't feel emotionally correct to you, that's a good point to start reaching out to other people. And I think especially for the DIYers out there who are making records at home, it's really good to check yourself, check your mixes, or check whatever's happening with like stuff that you like, stuff that you liked from the past, stuff that you like that's happening presently, from whatever, if that's like a Quincy Jones production, go listen to that Quincy Jones production and then listen to your production and see what's working and what's not working. And if you can't cross a divide, whatever that divide is, whether it's writing the right lyric or getting the mix to sound good, or you're just not able to get it loud enough without blowing out the bottom end in mastering or whatever, that's where I think the red flags, or that's where, there's an exit on that highway to start asking for help.
So like I got two things. The first is like there is one specific situation where if you only trust your gut and your intuition, it will actually lead you astray. And I deal with this like primarily as a mastering guy because it happens all the time, is loudness. Like
Sure.
I get a ton of people who like are doing what you'll say, like they'll take like a mix or something that you've done and they'll compare it directly to say like a Spotify stream.
Mm-hmm.
The mix, not the finished master,
Right,
or even the finished master sometimes,
Sure.
and it won't sound as loud.
Right.
And they will start to think like, oh, like it doesn't sound as loud, it must not be as good. And that in that one context, you really can't trust your gut. Like before something is mastered, it's not done. And even after it's mastered, unless you have like a very specific set of settings dialed into, say, Spotify, you're not going to get an apples to apples comparison. Like the only way to get an apples to apples comparison, if you're directly comparing masters, is to download a file, like ideally at the original
highest
resolution,
quality,
which is like kind of hard to find, but even just downloading the file and like literally just being it inside a digital audio workstation. If you just play a master that somebody sent you and then play a Spotify thing without volume matching it, you're going to think something's wrong when something might not be wrong. And
totally.
So volume matching is always something I recommend when you're evaluating a master is don't make any judgments on quality before you've turned the volume up or down so that both of the things that you're comparing are at the same volume. So
yeah, and I do this with my clients in the studio when we're getting near, or not all the time, but sometimes when we're getting near the end of a mix, and they're like, okay, let's see if this is competitive. I'll bring, just through fancy routing on the patch bay, I'll bring Spotify back into the DAW, and I'll just adjust the fader amount so they're approximately equal volume. So we can just listen to whatever songs they want to listen to on Spotify and listen to the mix that we're working on. And then that way they're not doing it at home. They're not doing it without like somebody there who's, been around the block however many times. And just listen. And that can be super helpful as well, because I tend to mix pretty dark. I don't know why, I'm just sensitive to high end. So, but that's super helpful for me because we'll listen to, a bunch of like doom metal songs. I'll be like, even those have more top end than our mix. Let me take 15 minutes and like bump up the high end on a couple things or whatever. And yeah, it's super helpful to do that volume matching when you're working on things. And then also, it's really okay to be like, I literally don't know how to make this louder. I am doing everything in my power to make this as loud as I can, and it's just not getting there. That's a good place to call a mastering engineer or someone else into help.
But also understanding that loudness is not necessarily something that you need to compete on, because if you're talking about streaming, a lot of times it varies by streaming service, but every streaming service pretty much dynamically adjusts volume in the background. So like if you listen to like a Miles Davis tune and a Frank Ocean tune on Spotify, they're going to sound different, but they're going to sound comparably loud. They were recorded 60 years apart. The actual level on those tracks is completely different.
Yeah, it's wildly different. Yeah.
But you would never know it as a consumer listening to Spotify because the service handles all of that in the background, which is, again, we're getting back into like the apples to apples comparison. So I like to tell people nowadays, like, you need to compete on sound quality. Like if
Yeah.
somebody is
Yeah.
listening to your mix, you want them to want to turn it up, and it is
Right.
okay for them to like
Right.
reach for the volume knob and turn it up. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, we don't want them to like be maxing out their volume sliders just to hear something, but
Right.
you're probably more in the ballpark than you think. And a
Sure.
lot of times, going for way too much loudness leads you to sacrifice dynamics, and dynamics in music are like the thing that makes it the most interesting. Like dynamics
Sure.
are really important. And if you crush all those out, they're just you're not going to stand out. So it's
Right.
really like a sound for me. It's a sound quality thing, and there's always a balance between loudness and sound quality. When I'm mastering something, I'm always trying to get it as loud as possible without sacrificing sound quality and while being
Hmm.
in specification. Like your
Right.
mastering
Right.
engineer should know all of the specifications for the various streaming services, and they should understand how that works.
Yeah, and that
So
that
yeah.
last part is to me kind of what I was talking about, and super important. And I say this: I do not offer mastering to anybody,
I appreciate
unless
that.
it's
Thank
like
you.
absolute, like, someone's crying in the control room next to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
I don't do it because I don't know all those specifications. I don't want to know all those specifications,
It's a
etc.
different thing.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's completely different. And for me, that's where I am more than comfortable. And I would encourage everybody who gets stuck up on a few things where it's like, yeah, it's okay to not know. Just
Yeah.
admit that you don't know, and that's going to be better. Give it to someone who does know, because there's people like you, and there's other mastering engineers, or there's who, fill in the blank for whatever thing you're trying to accomplish. There are people who have spent years and years and years um, studying and getting good at whatever, um, who want to help you.
Yeah.
Like
And
that's a huge thing.
if they're good, they
Yeah.
should explain themselves to you, and they should like have
Right.
a conversation and like really be gentle, and like any that gets into like the second thing on like having a bad experience in a pro studio that I've seen is it's not just about whether the producer you're thinking about worked on music that you like. Like
Mm-hmm.
a lot of musicians, they'll see a producer like, ooh, they did this album or they did that album, or like this is my favorite album, I should just use that guy. No, like you should only use that guy if you like their music, or girl or whoever. If you like their music and you have a very good personal relationship,
Yeah.
like it has to be
Absolutely.
both of them. Like
Yeah.
if you're a great musician and you worked on a great album, but the personal connection is not there, it's not going to be a good experience.
Nope. No. I mean, that is huge to me, and like I have done this for as long as as long as I've been making records. As much as it's helpful is before stepping into the control room, or stepping into the studio with a client, I want to go have coffee or a drink with them beforehand. Yeah. And like we might even have dates on the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff might already be booked, but I want to at least sit down and see what kind of person they are, see what the sort of power dynamic is, if it's a band or an ensemble, know who the decision makers are, blah, 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 so that I can give like the best service that I know how to. And that I can't think of any time where I've met someone and been like, ooh, I don't think we can be in the room with one another.
Huh. Well, because
But
you're
if
like a
that did ever
good guy.
happen,
Yeah.
well, thank you.
Yeah.
But if that did ever happen, I would be like, you know what? I think that you're going to have a better experience with this other person. Let me recommend them to you.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, first of all, I don't want to waste my time in that scenario, because I already know that like I'm not going to have fun. And if I'm not having fun, if I'm not enjoying myself even a little bit, I'm not going to do a good job. And that is the worst thing possible. Like, do not give me $500 a day
To do a crappy job. Yeah.
to do a crappy job.
Yeah.
That is the way, if I went to the doctor and they were in a really crap mood and like kept calling me names, I would be like, I'm not giving you my copay. I'm sorry. You can sort that out. I would lose that battle, but
Yeah, and I like for me, it's like ego is never okay if you're in the control room, and it's a big problem in the industry, frankly. Like I really wish there were just more kind studio people out there. Like
me too.
if you're in like the studio and you're working for artists, and
Mm-hmm.
like it is not your job to project your ego or your thoughts about what the music should be onto what's happening. It's your job to serve the artist and like make it a great experience for them, not for
Yeah.
you. And that's a big red flag for me. Like if you're talking with somebody and you get a sense that like they're ego driven or like there's any kind of that vibe coming at
Hmm.
really at any point, like it's not going to get better. That's a red flag. Like I
I
think
would
you'd probably find
say,
it better.
yeah, I think I agree with that 99%.
Ooh, what's the 1%?
The 1% is, right? And like, I'm really bad at remembering names or specifics of things, but I know for sure that historically there has been a really heavy handed producer or whatever, whomever, that has completely turned a piece of coal into a piece of gold. You know, like that has
Sure.
absolutely happened in the past. However, right, so the 99% is like the more important part, I think, where like I also would like to see more friendly people. And I think that's actually happening. You know, I've been around
Yeah.
a bunch of studios in the last year, um, because I moved to a new space and I needed to see a bunch of different recording spaces and see what was available. And every person just about that I met was super duper friendly and like really welcoming, had a really nice demeanor and blah blah blah. Um, but you know, I know this as well, which is where the 1% creeps in. Is like I've been a part of records and I've been asked to produce records that on their release, I know I could have been more assertive on something and made a better product, and probably done it without breaking anyone's heart. But I'm being sometimes it's a thing that each professional has to sort of find out for themselves, and I guess it's like a constant learning curve. Um,
Well, but
but
those things are
learning how to
mutually
be
exclusive.
assertive, yeah,
Like
learning how to
you
be
can be
assertive
exclusive
without
while
being
being kind.
egoic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So, but I definitely agree with you on, you know, it's the artist in the room. They're, you know, in the best case scenario, they're going to be singing the songs that you're working on for decades.
Yeah.
So who fucking cares about you? You know, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you're on the liner notes, if that. You know, if
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, so it's about them. It's their face and their name going out into the world. You know, you're there as a service. You know, it's a customer service job more than a technical or an artistic job, in my
100%.
opinion.
Yeah, me too.
Um,
And like for mastering, I tend to do a lot of remote work. So like
mm,
I don't have as many of those in-person conversations, but I wish there was more of them. Like
mm,
if you're working, if anybody who's listening, if you're working with anybody who's doing remote stuff, just because we're going back and forth via email doesn't mean that like I don't want you to jump on a call. Like I love it when
sure.
artists are like, "Hey, can I just call you about this?" Because you always get more from like a 5 minute conversation than you would with a long email chain. And that's kind of typical with mastering guys is like you're oftentimes, I mean, a lot of times you can be in the session, but a lot of times it is remote, but you should always feel
Sure.
free to call them, you know, like give them
Yeah.
a call, like talk to them, like any information that you can give them that gives the personality of what you're trying to do, it's just going to help them do their job better. So
Yeah.
don't be afraid of that for sure.
I
Like
mean,
call your
man,
people.
when I got the last Debbie Cousins record mastered,
Mm,
or I guess when we got it mastered, um, we used Bill Skivvy in
mm,
Detroit. He works with Third Man
cool.
Records,
Cool.
and he called me because whenever I send stuff to mastering, I have a little like mastering submission sheet that has all the
Oh,
relevant
cool.
info, and it
Nice.
just says if you have any questions, whatever, just call me or shoot me an email. So he sent me an email that was like, "I'm calling you in 15 minutes," and I was
Perfect.
like, "Oh, okay, cool." So we ended up talking for like 2 hours, just about everything, nothing, and then the specifics of the project. Um, and that, I mean, he's won my business for life. You know, I don't use him
Awesome.
for
Yeah.
every single project because he's not always the right guy. But I will, unless he calls me and, you know, or like it turns out that he's like some kind of monster, which he isn't, you
Yeah.
know, I will be sending him stuff for as long as I'm making
Yeah.
records, you
Yeah.
know, because that went so far
Mm-hmm.
above and beyond. And I've worked with a fair amount of mastering engineers, and I've actually had a mostly good experience with all of them. But there
Yeah.
are some people where you just send it off and like their email back to you is just cold and sterile and like only
Yeah.
about the specs, you
Mm-hmm.
know, no opinion offered,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. And it's so impersonal. It's, you know, it's like, that's not, we literally make, and this is something that I wanted to talk about is like, music is a communal activity.
Yeah.
Music is bringing people together. It's always been an act of communication outward and inward. Um, so, you know, if you're working with people, you should have a good rapport with them, which is like really back to the main point is if you're not vibing with like the person who you're in the room with or potentially going to be in the room with, don't work with that person.
Yeah.
That's about as cut and dry as it needs to be.
Yeah, 100%. So like, how do you like? So if you're a DIY person, you're trying to make a record, you don't know, like, you don't necessarily have the budget to hire like 17 engineers and like a huge team of people. How do you pick and choose? Like, what do you? And it's going to vary by project, but like, what are the
Sure.
questions that you should be asking if you're trying to figure out like where can I get the most bang for my buck in terms of who should I hire? Should I only hire a
Yeah.
mastering guy? Should I only hire a mixing guy? Do I need to track in the
Right.
studio, like, etc.?
Well, I think all of those questions are good
Yeah.
starting points. I mean, first of all, I would ask your peer group, right? If you have friends who are also in bands and making records, chances are they've run into people in the community or people outside of the community, and that's a good place to start as any. And just be like, I don't really know what I need, mixing, recording, mastering, whatever. And more than likely, people are going to give you some references. And then when you start asking, I mean, I encourage everybody. I encourage questions from all of my clients.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
And I encourage them to ask questions that they think are stupid, that they think they should know already, or whatever. And I say that when I pass them on to whomever is mastering or mixing, if I'm not mixing the project, I say do the same thing. And if that person treats you like crap or doesn't answer your questions, tell me, and I'll find a new person, and I will not give business to them anymore because like you're fucking paying them. You're paying their rent. You're putting food on their table. They can take 15 minutes to answer an email or take a phone call or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge thing. I encourage people to ask me questions. When it comes to mastering, I always give like a list of like people in different price ranges, what they've worked on previously. And that's the other thing is like, and it goes back to something you've said before, is like you should maybe search out people who have made records that you like the sound of, but that should not be the only criteria. It is how you get along with them. It's how quickly they get back to you. It's how busy they are right now. I definitely my customer service to brand new clients definitely drops if I'm in the middle of projects because I don't have the time. And I try my best to tell people that like, hey, I'm really busy for a couple weeks or whatever. But like I haven't made my own music in a long time, so I can't speak about this currently. But like if I were making records, if I were making my own music and I reached out to somebody, I'm probably reaching out in a moment of urgency just because that's the person that I am. So if someone is really busy and they can't get back to you and they're like the most ideal person for you and whatever, I would probably just like be like maybe next time.
Yeah.
Because I'm an anxious ball of energy and so I would need an answer today. So I would just keep fishing around and find somebody who maybe isn't the exact right person but like can answer my questions for me.
Yeah, and I don't know, for me, like, I want more questions and more communication from my clients. Like, I'm never gonna say less of that is better.
Right.
Like give me a call. Talk to me about what you want. Like, I'm here for you. We're all here for you. And also don't be intimidated. I think intimidation is maybe a little, especially the DIY people who haven't maybe been in a studio before. It's like they maybe don't know what questions to ask or if they can ask questions, and treat it like a doctor. Right? Like when you go to the doctor's office, you might not know what questions to ask, but you give them your symptoms, right? Like you tell them what you want, you tell them what's happening, and then it's their job to take it from A to B,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, like staying vigilant and assertive throughout the process. I've heard about projects happen. I'm sure I've accidentally done this to people before where, you have the initial call or the initial conversation and then you never really check back in. And everyone's kind of going along with it, hoping that maybe it'll magically turn into what they want. But you have to stay assertive, and hopefully the people that you're working with, I keep learning this lesson over and over again, is for me to like check in emotionally and with my clients. on the first day, on, you know, at the time of mixing, whatever, just be like, hey, is this going the way you want it to be going? Like,
Hmm.
can anything be better? And usually it's nothing, but every now and again you learn something.
And you don't have to have like the precise technical knowledge to like describe what you want necessarily. I think that's what keeps a lot of people from speaking up is like they feel like something isn't right,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't know how to express it correctly.
Right.
Like any information is good information. So again, like if you're at the doctor, you don't have to know this specific muscle and this tendon hurts. You just say, "Hey doc, I don't like this right here." And then the doc will ask you a bunch of other questions to like narrow it
Right.
down, right?
Right.
So just express yourself in whatever way that you want to. And my suggestion is always to like take it to like different mediums. So like try thinking about what you want to have happen like as a color or as a
Mm,
material or as like a picture. Like if you can describe what you want as like a picture, like a fuzzy picture, or it's like
right.
a
Right.
very sharp picture, or it's got depth, or it doesn't have depth. Like
Mm-hmm.
all of that's information that, like as engineers, we can translate that into what you want.
Right.
You know?
At the very least, we can start steering the ship in a general direction. You know,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. I talk a lot in movies, and I actually don't know that much about movies, so it's always the same ones. But I'm like, are you going for more like Shining, or are you going for more Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Oh, all right, that's
Um,
kind of good. That would be good for like a metal band, probably,
yeah,
right?
I
Like,
mean,
yeah.
I do that with like folk artists all the time,
Nice. Yeah,
just
nice,
to
nice.
inject a little excitement into the session or whatever. But it's like, and then I do that with people when they're singing too. You know, sometimes people don't know, and I don't know all the perfectly correct terminology, but I'll be like, sound like you're more excited or whatever, sing with a smile on or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And if
Mm-hmm.
you get the same performance, so it's like, okay, right now you are Leslie Knope in Parks and Rec.
Yeah,
You need to sing like Leslie Knope. You know,
yeah.
like that level of excitement is what I want to hear from you in this song. And so it can go the other way. But yeah, I mean, I think honestly, I get a fair amount of work from people who don't have good language. I work with a lot of people who are intuitive musicians, um, and they don't know the right words. If I say 100K or 100 hertz to them, their eyes roll into the back of their head. So you just abandon that entirely, and people are like, "Well, I really like Willie Nelson and whatever." Um, and then you just go from there, and you start trying to find the path forward.
I love it. We actually have a question coming in. It's really great.
Oh, hell yeah!
Rocket's Red Glare is asking, and I think this is a great one to talk about because it's really confusing nowadays. How do you define the role of producer to clients?
Well, first of all, I should say that Raymond, who is the question asker,
Okay.
um,
How's
just
your name?
hire him because he's the best producer there is. Um, the role between producer and engineer. Wow. In the most ideal setting, right? Like the producer is there as like the cheerleader and liaison for the band between their art and everything else.
So less of a technical position.
Less of a technical position. So
That's how I
they're,
like it. That's very old school, but like I
mhm,
love it. Like that's how I
yeah.
like to produce. Yeah.
And I haven't had a whole lot of experience with that until I started working with Raymond. And I engineer for Raymond all the time. And it's
Cool.
fantastic because Raymond trusts me to
Yeah.
be like, he's like, we're going to record acoustic guitar now. And then I just go off and set up microphones and get the headphones ready and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And the artist sits down and everything's ready to go. And I say, can you give me a little bit? And blah, blah, blah. And then Raymond will nudge over to me and be like, hey, can we like move that closer to the microphone or closer to the guitar or further back from the guitar or whatever? Because at that point, he's got the elevation and perspective to see, to hear the song wider than I can.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get into, and I was just talking with Austin Owen yesterday about this,
Great. Love it.
where when you are the only person in the room and you're doing production and engineering, that can be really fun, but it's a lot to handle. It's a lot to be like, oh, you need help with the bridge, and I also need to start setting up for the string players who are coming in
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you wanted to rewrite the chorus lyrics. You know, it's a lot going on.
It's a lot, and it's different brain spaces too. It's like producers, it's like big zoomed out creative decisions, and the engineering is usually very focused and like
Hmm.
details. And I don't know about you, but I have a really hard time switching my brain between those two places dynamically. So
Yeah, it's a
like,
lot of like context switching, right?
yeah, totally.
So yeah, I mean, I as much as possible, if I'm ever in the position of producer engineer, I try to do as much engineering. I try to front load a lot
Yeah,
of the engineering.
get all the
So it's like
setup
I
done. Yeah,
have the setup already. I sort of have a game plan of what's going to be used for overdubs. You know, what sort of flow to every day is going to be like. So I can just write all that down, think really technically ahead of time,
hmm,
plan it all out, and so that way I'm a little bit more, you know, emotionally and intellectually available on the day of.
yeah,
And then engineering, I think is, I think true engineers, and I'm not even really going to throw myself into that bucket, but maybe a little bit. But like really good engineers, like audio engineering is such a skill and such a craft. And these people are like the unsung heroes of all the best records. Maybe not all the best records, but like a lot of really good records. I think audio engineering is completely underrated by just about everybody, including audio engineers.
yeah.
Um, I definitely fall into the category of like someone who knows how to do engineering but really wants to be producing most of the
Hmm.
time,
Yeah.
more or less. But um, but I love engineering. And
Yeah.
when you see someone who is really good at engineering, like you, like my brain melts. You know, it's like how in the world did you get a piano to sound like that? You know, it's not the part, it's not the whatever. It's like the technicals. Like I can hear the dust on the strings vibrating, and that is amazing. You know.
For me, it's kind of like the Instagram effect with photographers, right? Like Instagram made everybody a photographer. It didn't mean that photographers weren't really skilled or aren't doing well. It's just it's harder for like the lay person to see the difference nowadays, you know? And
Yeah,
like,
sure.
yeah, like it's like the audio engineering is just as important as it's ever been. Everybody just thinks they can do it really well because you can buy the technology for like
Right,
under
right,
two
right, right,
thousand
right.
dollars, you know?
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I don't have anything against people using like the Chris Lord-Alge plugins, like the Chris Lord-Alge drums
Yeah.
or vocals or whatever. Like,
Sure.
you know, do whatever if it sounds
Yeah.
good. But like you should, you know, I would encourage people to try and figure out what is going on behind the scenes of those types of plugins, like the sort of do it all in one or the Swiss Army knife kind of stuff, where it's like, okay, there's a slapback delay happening when you pull up this fader, and like, what is a slapback? Like, how many milliseconds of delay is that? What
Mm-hmm.
kind of delay is that? Blah 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 blah.
100%.
Um, and you know, those are really useful because you don't want to just rely on that. I don't think, especially if you're going for like really high quality stuff. You know,
Yeah,
you
no,
don't want to rely.
presets don't work. It's the knowledge that
Mm.
works, you know.
And presets are great for discovering stuff. And I
Yes.
was going to say this too: is I encourage I like to encourage people recording themselves.
Yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
love DIYers
Yes.
because like those people who aren't engineers, you know, who aren't sitting in recording studios, who aren't blah blah blah, they will come up with stuff that like I would never come up with in a million years.
Yeah.
And it's like when you flip through the presets, like I love Sound Toys for this because
Oh, I
on
love the
all of
Sound
their
Toy stuff.
plugins,
It's so
you
good.
just flip through the plugins and you're like, or through the presets on one of the plugins, and you'll come across something that I couldn't have even imagined. And then you're like, this probably doesn't work for this song, but I'm going to remember that
Yeah,
because like
totally.
I want to use that later. I
But
want to have fun with that.
but there's a difference between like the discovery and the writing process. Like I put that in the writing and demoing camp.
Mm,
Like that is different than the actual production process. You know, it's like you're not writing the script from scratch when you're shooting the movie. Like
sure. Right.
you can
Yeah.
make adjustments,
Right.
but you know, like I don't know. Okay, so let's actually do another question. This is from Az Fink. How do you deal with ear
What up?
fatigue when engineering long sessions for clients? And I got an answer for that. Watch. You don't have to listen as loud, and you should just take breaks. Like I think you got about 2 hours max in front of the speakers until you need to just step out of the room, you
Sure.
know? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know how you feel about that.
I mean, I agree with both of those things. Like, don't listen too loud and take breaks frequently. Also, what up, Mike? Um, Fink is a great producer. Really,
Honestly.
really, really phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anywho, so yeah, take breaks. Drink a lot of water.
Yeah. Eat.
That's
Don't
usually
forget to
good.
eat.
I'm really bad at all of the above. But yeah, try to take breaks, and then man, don't. I hate saying this because I break this rule all the time, but don't do giant, like long marathon sessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, after 8 hours, 10 hours
You're
max,
not making good choices. Yeah.
you're not
You're not
making
making
good
good choices.
decisions.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to say, what was it? Oh, I'm going to forget the name of this, but I think it's called an ultradian rhythm. We know about circadian rhythms, which is
Mm-hmm.
like, when you're sleepy, sleep cycle and wake cycle. Well, there's another bodily cycle called an ultradian rhythm, I think, which is about 90 minutes long.
Mm-hmm.
So an hour and a half. And that is like, I don't know all the science, but you're just going through it throughout the day. So 90 minutes instead of a 2 hour mark is an hour and 30-minute mark is like what the new science is saying. Is like that's usually a good cycle for being active,
Yeah.
being super focused, and then taking a little bit of a break. So you could break that up into an hour and 15 minutes and then a 15-minute break. You could do it for an hour and a 30-minute break. You could do it for a full 90 minutes and then take a 90-minute break. But just sort of like marking your day in these 90-minute cycles,
Yeah.
as that's according to the literature, is supposed to help you out.
Maybe I'll take it one step farther. Like, I don't know that I would say ear fatigue should really ever be an issue in the studio because you should never be pushing yourself that far. Like you by the time you get to the place where your ears are feeling fatigued, you're already past the point of losing objectivity, and objectivity is the most important part in my mind of a lot of these choices. So like, yeah, don't do marathon sessions, but if you're even getting to the point where you're feeling like, ooh, my ears feel fatigued, you're past the point of diminishing returns. But the good news is it doesn't take a lot of um, break time to regain that objectivity. Like your ears
Sure.
and your brain can recover really quick. So just like what I do a lot of times, if it's a long, I don't mastering is quicker, so I don't have a ton of long marathon sessions. But if I was in like a production context, I'd be taking really frequent breaks. Like even just go
Mm-hmm.
walk around the block for 10 minutes, like get out of the room, take a breath, like that's going to help everything you're doing in addition to ear fatigue. And
Yeah, for sure.
like don't push yourself to the point of ear fatigue ever. And I do that too when I'm listening to monitors. Like whenever I was auditioning, different monitors for the
Mm.
mastering studio, I was very cognizant of ear fatigue because I knew I would have to like sit in front of them. But for me, it was like I need to be able to feel comfortable in front of these. And
Mm.
if there was any type of even feeling of ear fatigue for me, I was like, nope, gone. I had that problem with some of the Atom monitors I tried, which I think is
You
unique to
know,
me. But those
well,
tweeters, I think they gave me a headache. I don't know if that, I don't know. It
I
was
mean,
weird.
yeah, definitely don't be around anything that gives you a headache. But I've worked on three different types of Adams monitors. One of those I've really liked.
Hmm.
The other two I just didn't have a very good experience with. But I
Yeah.
know some people who absolutely swear by them and make
Yeah.
really great records on them. So it definitely is like, it's different strokes for different folks,
Yeah. Very
as far as
personal.
like what you're listening to. And you do need to have a certain sort of kinship with your own mind and body when you're working on, especially creative work. It's the easiest thing in the world to like just get hooked on what you're doing and never
Yeah.
ever ever stop.
Yeah.
And that is, you're playing with fire at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely one thing that we miss in the digital world, is that to get to the beginning of the song, you can do that in an instant,
Yeah.
like two key clicks, and it's just happening.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in like the digital world, you had to wait for the
The
tape
analog
machine,
world.
or sorry, the
Yeah.
analog world.
Yeah.
You had to wait for the tape machine to rewind. And
Yeah.
like
I hadn't
those
thought of
little
that. That's
breaks
true.
make
Mm-hmm.
a difference. And
Yeah.
also staring at the computer screen for all day is probably not very good for you.
Yeah.
which is important. That was definitely another thing. Catherine Varicoli and I used to talk about this at 513, where like whenever we were doing tape sessions, it was always like, it's just a more pleasant sort of psychological day.
Yeah.
And we had never really like put a pin on that as to why that was happening until, you know, she made this realization that like, oh, we have like 25 to 45-second breaks constantly when we're
Yeah.
working on tape.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just I try my best to like, when we're not working or when I'm setting up a microphone or whatever, if we're not working on a part, like audio is not coming through the speakers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're
Mm-hmm.
like, we're paused, we're taking a little moment. Um, and I know some people who just let it loop, you know, while they're setting stuff up or whatever. And you know, whatever floats your boat. But for me,
Yeah.
I relish in like those moments of silence, and I think that's what like keeps your energy sustained.
Yeah, I agree. We have another question. Do you put mastering chains on demos or leave master mix dry? For me, it's contextual. I think that's getting into the kind of thing where like, should you master a demo? You should master a demo if you're going to release it. Um, if it's me, you know, if you're going to put a mastering chain on a demo just to get a sense for like what would this sound at full level if it had like a rough master, I think that's very helpful. Like, and it can be helpful as like an educational tool. Like if you're demoing something and
Mm-hmm.
like you're trying to mix something and you're trying to like figure out how your mixes are going to react to the mastering process, then yeah, like super helpful. I would definitely leave the master mix dry if you're sending it out for mastering. Like any mastering engineer is not going to want to, like they're going to want
Yeah,
a clean
right.
input.
No one
Uh,
wants. Yeah, your mastering engineer doesn't want your limiter, your plugin
yeah,
limiter, to
and
work
I'd
with.
say like you know, it's not bad to master stuff yourself. You can gain a lot of quality by choosing not to. But if it depends on if you're going to release the master or not. Like if I would put a mastering chain on a demo if I didn't have the budget to put it out to send it out, and I was going to release it. You know,
Sure.
if I wasn't
Yeah.
going to release it, I wouldn't probably do that.
Who did
I don't
that
know.
question come from?
Easy think.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
cool. Yeah, I think. Yeah, I just wanted to know, thinking about like his specific situation. So there's a lot of different in yeah, a lot of different workflows for a lot of different things that you're working on.
Yeah.
So when you're working on like a demo and you're maybe like you're swapping the beat or the music between different lyricists or different vocalists or whatever, I would probably go ahead and like put a mastering chain on it so that when
Mm,
people are writing, they're feeling inspired, they're like getting a pumpiness, they're, you know, it's loud, it's whatever. Um, I'm really torn on like whether or not to limit or like, you know, put mastering or fake mastering as I call it on rough mixes or demos or whatever for listening, because I think there's such a thing as audio memory.
yeah.
Um, and that's part of where demoitis comes from, where you're just used to hearing something a specific way for
Yeah.
a long time, and then you have a hard time changing that, even if it's a better change, even if it opens things up and it makes things more dynamic, it makes things more musical and emotional or whatever. If you're stuck thinking that your fake mastered demo was good because it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
loud,
Yep.
you're sort of
Totally.
shooting yourself in the foot a little
And
bit.
like I've definitely come into that too, like it because you know I deal with some mixing engineers who like will send their artists like a fake mastered mix, or like they'll just put a limiter on it and they'll boost it up a little bit to level to like make it easier to listen to, and it just kind of kicks the can down the road in a way that's not helpful for me as the mastering engineer,
Sure.
because I'm having to master to spec, and a lot of
Right.
times the mixing engineers either don't know or don't care about the spec, they're just boosting the volume. And
Mm-hmm.
so if you're the artist and you get like a mix that is loud, and then I give you a master that sounds better but is even a little bit softer, it makes it almost impossible for me to like get an approval on the master, and it puts you as the artist in a position where you don't know what to approve, and you like up is now down, and like you don't know what's
Right.
right or wrong. And So I generally don't recommend that. Like if you're mixing something, my rule of thumb is when the mixes are done, it should sound exactly how you want it to sound in every way, with the only exception being final volume level. If you have to like crank up the mix when you're checking it against something, that is okay. Like
Yeah,
if it sounds
amen.
good, if it sounds good when you crank it up, you're good. The
Yeah,
mastering guy will then bring it up to full level and handle it in a better way.
absolutely.
But don't over boost it in the mixing stage and then have to bring it down in mastering. Like
Right. Yeah,
that's
I
gonna
think
screw
that's
it.
really important. And yeah, I think, when if I send like rough mixes or demos out to people, it's so, and I've put like a mastering chain or something on there. Um, I try to make it pretty obvious that this is not the final thing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
I'm not intentionally ruining anything, but it's like,
yeah,
yeah, the bass is not going to be that loud or whatever. The
yeah,
drums aren't all going to be panned off to the left, or something like that. Where it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
the ugliness or like the non-finishedness is very apparent, so that everyone is waiting for this thing to get better,
Mm-hmm,
even if it's just marginally better,
mm-hmm.
and not getting too wrapped into the demo.
Yeah,
Because I mean, I've shot myself in the foot with that
yeah,
thousands of
100%.
times.
Because what you don't want to do is you don't want to send a mix that's too loud, have the mastering engineer do a good job mastering, but it appears softer, and then you
Right.
have the artist asking to
Right.
boost it more and more and more to get
Right,
it
right,
back
right,
to that level when they basically just didn't have the right frame of reference
right,
at the end
right.
of
And I
mix
don't want to
stage.
have to defend my mastering engineer to my client.
Yeah,
That's like the worst
yeah,
possible thing because, like,
yeah,
I don't know enough to be helpful.
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
just
You
being
just
like,
want to
trust
trust.
him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, we have another technical question. Is there a huge difference between perceived loudness and LUFS? Interesting. Okay, so LUFS is a technical measurement of perceived loudness. It's kind of an imperfect measurement, and LUFS is more of a specification and a guideline over like a target. That's kind of what I like to say. Like the streaming services use them as targets, like they will move your music up and down to meet a certain LUF specification, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to use that as a target when you're actually in the production stage. I tend to use it more as a guideline, and again, like I'm trying to get the music as loud as I can without it um, without it while still sounding good. So like if I can get to a great sounding record and it's at negative 18 lufs, awesome. If I can get to a great sounding record and it's, negative 12, negative 11 lufs, um, that's probably okay depending on the style of music and depending on, most importantly, on the playback medium. And that's a big thing, is like the specification changes depending on what you're talking about. So like if you try and take like a very negative 10 lufs master and use it for vinyl production, you're going to get trash out the other end.
Hmm.
um, if you do it with streaming, you can get away with it for sure, but it depends a little bit on the style of music. So
Right. So real
yes.
quick before, or yeah, I was just going to ask,
Oh, go ahead.
what are your targets, or like what are your, obviously things change like song and music dependent,
Yeah,
but do you have like a ballpark arena on different measurement styles that you're after when you're mastering?
my ballparks, it really does depend on the style of music, and then every time I think I have a good target, I find something that breaks the rules. So
Yeah,
like,
totally.
so for example, and I'm actually going to go into this a little bit on some of the writings that I'm doing on this, you'll see in like the next couple of weeks. But there's a really famous song, not famous song, but it's a very well-known song. There's an Adrian Lenker album called Songs that's out right now, and that's kind of blowing up on Spotify. It's like very big,
Mm.
and that record, I liked the sound of it, so I actually downloaded the files and I took a look. And if you actually look at the digital files of that, I'm pretty sure that they sent a vinyl master in for streaming. Like
Oh shit!
there is a solid like 4 decibels of empty space on top of the waveform that like
Whoa!
there's no
They
reason
could
for them to
have,
do
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
you could have just boosted that up and you wouldn't have lost any quality. You wouldn't have been over compressing, and you don't notice those differences. Like,
Wow.
and that's for me, that's an example of like you can really, especially with streaming mediums, it doesn't really, and this gets into your second question, Az Fink, like you can't judge whether your masters sound quieter or louder than professional stuff unless you're making an apples to apples comparison. And if you pull a bunch, so what you should do is you should take a bunch of your favorite records. You should take the finished master files that are at the highest quality you can find, throw them into a DAW, and then put them next to yours and just see where they hit. And what you're going to find is that you're going to see stuff that looks really different. Like you're going to see music that looks like it should be too soft that doesn't actually sound too soft. You're going to find music that looks like it was way over compressed that sometimes doesn't sound like it was over compressed. So like loudness is really weird, and it's the measurement LUFS is not it is very helpful. It's like the best measurement that we have, but your ears are a dynamic system. So like
Right.
when you're using LUFS, you're trying to apply a mathematical measurement to a dynamic system that's always changing. So
Right.
it's always completely contextual, and the context and the experience, that's a big part of what a mastering guide does. So if you're looking to make your masters sound louder, I would suggest two things. Understand your targets, and you can go a little louder. Like if I have a client that really is insistent on something being louder upon delivery, I'll push it up into like -12 LUFS. You know, you'll lose a little bit of quality on the back end if you do that, but the streaming services are really good. You're probably not going to notice.
Right.
And then also balance dynamics and loudness, and that's the big thing people don't understand is loudness is not a measurement. It's a combination of the volume and the contrast. So if you have loud and soft contrast in your music, it's gonna sound louder. It's extremely counterintuitive. A good way to maybe like think about it is like think about when you last listened, or like if you're a drummer, sit down behind the kit and just start smashing, right? In about 5 minutes, it's not going to sound as loud as it did when you started, because your ears are going to dynamically adjust to the volume because there's no contrast. So contrast in music, if you leave space and if you have softness and loudness together, that will actually sound louder than just artificially turning up a volume knob.
Right.
Let's see. Yeah, like so AZ Fink is referencing an example, the middle by Zed, where the LUFS are -9 and the file looks super compressed but sounds punchy and clear. Go, it's hard to say without actually looking at the file and kind of doing an analysis and seeing it. From your question, I'm getting a bit of a sense that you're a little too into the numbers, and the numbers are kind of getting you turned around. Like,
Yeah.
like you're not like whenever we're making music, we're using the meters and we're using measurements like LUFS as a guideline rather than a target. So there has to be two things happening together. You have to have sufficient loudness with good quality. If you have good quality without sufficient loudness, yeah, it'll probably sound a little soft, but it'll still sound good when you turn it up. If you have loudness without good quality, it'll sound bad whether it's loud or soft.
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm really answering
know,
that question. I don't know. Go
yeah,
ahead.
I don't know that particular piece of music, but I would definitely second Greg and be like, don't worry too much about the numbers. And knowing where AZ Fink is and what he's up to, you know, like get a good mastering engineer. Hire
Yeah.
Greg. Because he'll worry about the numbers for you, and you're already making good music, so you just don't need to worry about it too much. And like the other thing too is like I'm just guessing because I have never even heard of that artist or that song, but like I'm guessing just based on knowing what Mike is into, the musical style is probably a whole lot of sample material.
Yeah.
Like you know. Taking samples from other people like pre-made beats or like vinyl rips or whatever, and those things usually when those things are being made and being delivered to you on something like Splice or like on a download or from a sample pack, they have been compressed, they have been EQ'd, they have been smashed, they've been, you know, like euthanized, they've been everything you can imagine before they even get to you. So when they end up in a production, that production ends up being really loud, sounding really punchy, blah, 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 because like the source material that's going in there has already been spec'd incredibly well.
Yeah.
And so that's just going to result in numbers that seem weird or like seem too good to be true or whatever. There's also probably a lot of lying going on in those numbers. And like, it just doesn't really matter. You're making good records, Mike, and like, you know, especially if you're using sample material, you don't have a whole lot of experience. You don't have a whole lot of like leeway in manipulating them. So
Yeah.
just make the good music, find a good mastering engineer who fits your budget, and don't worry about the numbers. Stop looking
Well,
at the numbers.
Well, yeah, and also like there's just variables that you don't know. Like when you're giving me those numbers, what I'm thinking on that particular song is that the file that you're getting the -9 LUFS from, that could have been a CD master. That could have been a completely separate
True.
master that was never like you know. And so it's like, where'd you get the file from? Like what? Like there's so many variables that like you can't really isolate, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't want to draw wrong conclusions. Like you wouldn't want to
Right.
look at a CD master, which is gonna be louder than a streaming master, and draw a wrong conclusion that you have to then boost everything to -9,
Right.
because that could totally screw things up for streaming. And then the other complication is that to make all of these judgments, going back to monitoring, you have to have a very strong monitoring and acoustic setup
Mm,
to even be able to perceive the loudness accurately. So like if you're trying to make some of these judgments using a non-professional monitoring system, it's not going to work. And like a good analog to that is like professional color correction in filmmaking. Like if you try and do like professional level color correction on like your phone screen, it's not going to work. Like the only way to do that is to use the $10,000 monitor that gives you like the absolute reference so that you know it's
mm-hmm.
going to work the same everywhere else.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think about this kind of stuff like with cooking all the time, you know?
Yeah.
And
It's
like,
very, very similar. Yeah.
it's super similar to cooking. And so if you're working with top-notch ingredients, and with a chef and and a line cook who really know how to do this stuff, you're going to get like a really, really, really beautiful looking, beautiful tasting, beautiful smelling dish that comes out brought to you by someone in a tie. But if you try to make that at home without the same, you know, you don't have the experience of the line cooks who have been chopping onions for like 15 hours every day for the last 30 years or whatever, it's going to look a little different. And like, it's kind of pointless to try and recreate the exact thing. What you want to do is like take the influence and the inspiration from that really delicious meal you had out at the 5-star restaurant and bring some of that into your kitchen. And like, if you're making good food and people like eating it, don't worry about it because you're not serving it to, you know, you're not doing this exact same thing. You're
And
making
I
it
love
your
that
own food.
analogy. That's a perfect analogy because I think a lot of DIY people feel pressure to like recreate the restaurant experience working out of their home kitchen.
Right.
And don't you like you're not going to do a very good job if you try and do that, but it doesn't have to be those things.
Right, man. Like
It's
I don't want 5-star fried chicken. You know, if I'm
yeah,
going to get fried chicken, I want fried chicken like from a food truck or from someone's backyard. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like if I go to a fancy Michelin star restaurant and someone gives me fried chicken, the fried part is like over on a different part of the plate. The chicken has been like boiled and like sous vide or whatever the fuck, and like I have collard greens that like, you know, look like the Eiffel Tower for some fucking reason. I don't want
yeah.
that when I'm eating fried
Stupid.
chicken.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't want
yeah,
that. That's not what I'm here for. Um, and so, yeah. Um, and then what was I going to say? Oh yeah. Well, no, never mind. We'll
No,
I'll
yeah,
deal with that
yeah.
later.
And you can extend that even further into like release schedules, right? Like I see a lot of artists who think that if they just release their home cooked stuff, it's going to lead to the stuff that would happen if you opened a restaurant, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
it's not like you have to open a restaurant, it's that you have to do both things. Like you shouldn't do only super produced stuff, but you shouldn't do only demo stuff either. And you should understand that, you know, the stuff you record yourself, it's probably great music. It might even sound good, but it fills a different part of your body of work than the professionally produced stuff. So both of those
Mm-hmm.
things have absolutely their place. But like what I get a little sad seeing is I see all this creative energy being thrown into like say Bandcamp, and you just get
Mm.
all these you know lovely musicians who are just throwing their stuff up on Bandcamp and not understanding why they're not getting traction.
Right.
And for me, the traction comes from variety of work. Like
Sure.
put your stuff up on Bandcamp, put your demos up on Bandcamp, but label them as demos so people know it's not the best you can do. And then maybe once a year, it's worth doing one thing that's a little bit more produced just to show that you can. Like that's a great way to like, work the budget line too. It's a little bit more cost effective.
Right. Yeah. I think, I mean, that kind of speaks to something I was going to say, which is like the whole DIY thing. There was some years ago, I saw someone repurposing DIY as DIT, and like do it together instead of do it yourself.
Nice. Yeah.
And I think that's like really wonderful. I'm a huge proponent of collaboration and all that kind of stuff. And part of that is like, I don't really know the best way to release music.
Yeah.
Even as a producer, I have ideas about it. I have opinions about it, but I'm not a marketing person. I'm not on that side of the business. I don't do any of those things. So I know a few people who've had successes and like know what they're talking about when they're talking about the music business. I rely on those people heavily, and those people like respond to a lot of emails on my behalf from the people I work with, because I personally can't be good at all of it.
Yeah.
And no one should be expected to be a 5-star chef and the perfect at-home fried chicken cook either.
And a restaurateur and the marketing director,
right?
And
and run a food truck and do all the rest of it. Like you can do all this stuff. This is the point. This is where I think like the DIY. Well, it's actually both things. Like I think there's a lot of misinformation or a lot of like false beliefs about
wishful thinking,
production, and DIY stuff, where like I think some people fall into the camp that like if any of my music ever touches the doors of a recording studio, all of my integrity is lost. And I'm never going to have success, and everyone will think that I'm lame or whatever. And then there are some people who are like, if I ever record in a living room, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot.
Both are wrong.
Both of those things are just ridiculous. There are people who want to help you. And I think that's like the main thing. And like, if you don't know the answer, if you don't know why something is hitting 9 lefts or whatever it is, and I do this constantly. Raymond who asked the question earlier, he has become like my sounding board for some of my mixes, because I don't always know if I'm hitting like 10s, and sometimes I'm not. And he's really good at like giving me advice. I talk to Austin Owen all the time about drum recording, about vibe. He's amazing. I talk to my musician friends of like, I'm not getting a good tone out of my drums. What kind of heads are you into right now? Or whatever. And they give me all that kind of information as well. And I'm more than willing to give that to other people, my clients and my friends alike. And so like that is my whole thing about all of these topics is even if you did everything alone, even if you wrote all the songs, recorded all the songs, mixed all the songs, mastered all the songs, put all the songs up on Bandcamp, put them on Spotify, blah, 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 you're still standing on the shoulders of giants, and you did not do it yourself. So like we should all really be embracing like our communities and our networks and getting the most out of them, and like, having conversations like this, whether it's on Instagram Live or like over a beer, you know what I mean? And when it comes to variety of work, that is how you get the variety of work. Because like, I pity the people, who like reach out to 5 recording studios in their town blindly. That person is in for like a really rough month. Like it's much nicer to reach out to someone you played a show with a couple, at this point 2 years ago, and be like, hey, where did you record? I know that you recorded at a studio. Did you have a good experience there? That's like way better. And like, how are you releasing your demos? Are you just putting them on cassette and giving them out for free? Or are you putting them on Bandcamp and all that kind of stuff?
I mean, I can't think of any record that I can think of that is even a little bit well known that wasn't a team effort. Like even the size of the team will vary. A lot of it, sometimes it's you and one other person. Sometimes it's a team of 20 people, and that varies by project, but it's always a team effort, and it's always people working together, and that's always going to trump anybody just doing every single job and trying to wear every single hat. Like,
Right.
very few people have the skill set to do that. I certainly don't. And even if you do miraculously have the skill set to do all of those things, nobody makes those choices because they're this, the people that are smart, put it this way, the people that have this, that are smart enough to have that big of a skill set, are also smart enough to know that if they hire one of those jobs out, it'll take it that much further than if they try.
And they'll be able to like sleep at night and like maybe eat a vegetable at some point. It's like, and that, you know, you got to be able to take care of yourself. And like the whole point, you know, this is all supposed to be fun. This is all supposed to be like, again, music and making music is about your community. It's about communicating the way that you're feeling. It's about having a shared experience. And so, you know, and that doesn't mean you shouldn't write solitary, insular music.
Yeah.
But like, what's the point of writing, you know, if someone sings a song in the forest, who the hell cares?
Yeah, if you write the best song in the world and nobody ever hears it, does it matter?
Right.
I don't know that it does, you know?
Like, if you want to make me cry, you know? I'm here for it.
Yeah. That's awesome, dude. Well, we're at about an hour and 20, so I think that's probably a good place to wrap it up. Unless you
this was super fun.
Super fun. I had a great time. If there's any like final questions, it's definitely a good time to throw those in there. We can maybe do one more, and if not, looks like we'll maybe wrap it up here. Maybe take it. I was trying to have like a glass of water so I could drink when I was asking for questions, but I don't. So I'm just gonna look at my watch and give it like 10 seconds. 10 seconds for people to ask one final question. I know we got one.
I have a
last
question.
joiner. Yes, please.
Where did you get those glasses frames?
I got these. I got these glasses. There's a glasses shop in Phoenix called Sassy Glasses. It's kind of a silly name. And actually, it's a really cool shop because these frames are actually like the most normal of all of the frames that they had. Most of the stuff in that shop is like crazy. It's like a big old like pink thing or something.
Yeah.
But
awesome.
the brand is a LA brand called Jacques Marie Mage, which sounds very douchey when I say it.
Jacques Marie Mage.
But it's actually, they're super well built. There's like metal inside the plastic. So like I bought them because I was like, these need to last. They're going to be on my face all the time. And Jacques Marie Mage and Sassy Glasses in Phoenix.
I'm going to look up Jacques Marie Mage.
M-A-G-E. Yeah.
M-A-G-E. Mage.
Yeah.
Mage. Okay. Cool.
Well, I love it, man. Thank you so much for talking. Thank you. This is so fun, and let's
do it again sometime.
Let's do it again sometime. Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who are listening, thanks for participating. I'm Greg. I do mastering. That's Dom. He does recording and production. Follow both of us. We're all doing many different things. Do you have anything that you want to tell the audience about what's coming up, or anything?
I don't even. Yes, I do. There's a new Alasan batch songs that are on the way. They are sounding fresh. I'm very stoked for that to happen. Let's see. There's stuff. I don't know exactly what I can talk about and what I can't talk about. So I'll just leave it at that.
Cool. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, guys. I hope this was valuable for everybody. And if it was, throw some follows down, give us some support, and we'll talk soon.
Bye.
Thanks, Dom. See ya.
See ya.